Today, we're going to talk about judicial elections in California. There are two different types of judicial elections. The first is competitive elections. Every county in the state, there are 58 counties. Each county has a superior court, and they have competitive elections where people can run against one another, and the voters have, at least two candidates, maybe more, to choose from on the ballot. Those are 6-year terms, and that's how we get some, not all, of our Superior Court judges. The second type of election that we have is called retention election. Those for our district courts and our California Supreme Court. These are our appellate courts. The governor appoints any vacancies, and then every 12 years, the voters get the opportunity to affirm or deny that judge another 12-year term. So those are retention elections. You don't get to choose between people. It's just, shall Judge Guerrero have another 12-year term or not? Yes or no? Okay, so Orange County Superior Court, there are 3 different levels of our courts. So Orange County Superior Court has 5 different justice centers. The Civil Complex Center and the Central Justice Center are both in Santa Ana, and then Harbor Justice Center in Newport, North Court in Fullerton, and West in Westminster. So we have judges at each of these courts. And if you're interested, you can go to occourts.org and learn more about the Superior Court system of California. The next level up, if you appeal a case from Superior Court to our appellate court, there are 6 district courts in California, and Orange County is in the 4th district. And so we're in that eastern part, is the southeastern part of the state, with San Diego and Imperial, Riverside, San Bernardino, and Inyo. So that's the 4th appellate court. And then there are all these other appellate courts. So those justices are appointed by the governor and then retained for office on the ballot for a 12-year term. California Supreme Court, same thing. The governor appoints, and then the next election, the judge is on the ballot to be affirmed by the voters for a 12-year term. So California Supreme Court only has 7 justices, as opposed to the United States with 9. And these are the current Associate Justices and Chief Justice Patricia Guerrero, who was sworn into office in 2023. So Superior Court competitive elections, they're, again, elected by the voters in the county. So they're one of the only elections where it's county-wide. Our Board of Supervisors is divided by district. Our Board of Education is divided by district. But the judges, the district attorney, the sheriff, all of those county-wide offices are running for, all 1.8 million voters in a county of 3.2 million people. So these are 6-year terms. Again, people can run against each other for them. You do have to be a lawyer for at least 10 years before you're eligible to run for office. Often people have far more experience than that before they run to be a judge, but that's the rule. When you look at the June 2022 turnout, which is where our competitive elections are on the primary, and the reason that they're on the primary ballot is because if no one gets a majority of the vote, there's a runoff election in November. The retention offices are in November because it's just a yes or no. So there's no need for a runoff. But when you look at this data, 68% of the voters in Orange County who turned out were white. 76% were 50 or older. So it's not a particularly representative electorate of the people. The young people 18 to 29 are the largest group of potential and registered voters, and yet they turned out at a very low rate, 8% voter turnout. So you just have a tremendous mismatch between who the people of Orange County are and who is selecting our district attorney, our judges, and all of that. Now, it's not the fault of the people who showed up, but we do have to do a much better job of informing and engaging people in the county and nationwide about the importance of the decisions that are made in these elections. Judges, I call this the lowest of the low information elections. There's almost no information. They're nonpartisan races, so you don't get to know uh, if they're Republican or Democrat, and that's a good thing. We don't want our judges to be partisan. But voters are left with very little information. The ballot statements tend to talk about justice and objectivity and wisdom, and those are all good things, but it's hard to make a distinction between who would best represent me and what I believe our justice system should be, with kind of buzzword bingo on a ballot statement, ballot statement. So we're left with ballot designations. Um, and when we look at a 10-year-old poll showed the ballot designation that's most favored by voters, that's the job that they list. So you get a name and you get a title. And what we see is deputy district attorney is the most popular. And so critics really do say that it unfairly favors prosecutors. Now, why is that bad? It's not necessarily bad. There are really good people who are working for our district attorney's office, really good prosecutors who, should be and have been elevated to the judicial office and have done an excellent job. But that is not true for everyone who has the job. And so there are some problems with that bias that favors prosecutors. And a lot of judges never even appear on the ballot. If no candidate files to challenge the incumbent judge, they're automatically reelected for another 6-year term on the bench. It's incredibly difficult to win against an incumbent Superior Court judge. If we'd had instances where incumbents were challenged and they got to say Orange County Superior Court judge incumbent, that would be the most popular ballot designation. But far and wide, no one challenges the incumbent because they'd much rather put their name on an open seat, which is what we see appearing on our ballots most often. So in 2022, there were 33 incumbent judges that had no challenger, and they were reelected for a 6-year term. 9 retirements, 8 retirements and 1 tragic death right before the election. And so there were 9 competitive elections on the ballot. It was a large number of them. In 2024, we see 33 incumbent judges reelected until 2030 without appearing on the ballot. And there are 3 competitive elections. Now, judges have a tremendous amount of power in choosing when they retire. If they retire in the middle of that 6-year term, then the governor appoints a replacement, and that person then is the incumbent judge that has the job. And the application process that we'll talk about it is really thorough and not a terrible way for the people to get judges selected on the bench. But this other way, where judges time their retirement so that their seat will appear on the bench, really does have a strong bias towards prosecutors. And one of the problems with that is that, thankfully, most of the court cases in Orange County and fairly uniformly across the board are not criminal cases. They're civil cases. There are people suing one another. There are family law. There are, tort cases and contract cases and lots of things that are not criminal. And I'm very pleased by that. I'm very pleased that we don't have, all of our courtrooms in Orange County filled with criminal cases. 24% are criminal cases. So do we need prosecutors as judges in all of these cases? Would it be better to have, a diversity of experience on the bench? And I think that this sort of shows that we do need more civil lawyers that have that experience, and not just electing prosecutors. We also have the reality that with low information elections, we've had some problems. Judge Klein was arrested for child pornography and was not facing a challenger and would have been reelected, but enough people, the media really covered the case, and so there were write-in candidates that came forward, and so he did have to appear on the ballot. But that's a big problem, especially with somebody who has that incumbent name. So John Adams was the write-in candidate who won. Great name. If you're ever looking to be a write-in candidate, it's easy to remember, and it certainly served him well. Turns out he was a pretty competent judge. So, but that's not how people were choosing between the 11 candidates. They were choosing because he had a very familiar name. So it could have gone a different way. Mark Kelly, there's a big push to recall him from office after he reduced the sentence for a convicted child rapist because he said that there was no violence or callous disregard for the 3-year-old who was sodomized and raped. Um, there was a big outcry about that. They didn't get enough signatures, and um, it's kind of slipped people's minds, even though the Board of Supervisors condemned him, even though there was a lot of media attention at the time. By the time his seat was up for re-election in 2018, no one challenged him. And 6 years later in 2024, we have the question of, will someone challenge him? It would seem like even if he was a good judge for everything but this particular case, that might be something that the voters have opinions on and want to look at his sentencing, his demeanor in court. It's something that most of us as voters don't have any interaction with unless we happen to serve on a jury in one judge's courtroom. Well, police and lawyers who are in courtrooms have much more information about these particular candidates on the ballot. But um, the answer is no. Nobody challenged him in 2024, and so he's reelected. He won't appear on the ballot and has another 6-year term. Uh, in 2022, we had a number of judges that were reelected. Scott Steiner had been censured for having sex with women in his chambers. He was reelected without a challenger. 2 of the DAs involved in Arch Snitch scandal, Michael Murray and Larry Yellen, who, as deputy district attorneys, were involved in this massive scandal and denied defendants their constitutional rights, and yet no one challenged them. And so they have been reelected and serve another 6 years. Major problems when people just are not aware of the situation. In 2022, we saw lots of people who were challenging the deputy district attorneys, deputy district attorney, deputy district attorney, all of these. And it's sort of curious how, it seems a little bit calculated that there's never a deputy district attorney challenging another deputy district attorney. It seems like there might be some coordination and choosing which seat that these folks run for. Sean Nelson, who had been on the supervisor, he was a city council member in Fullerton. He was on the Orange County Board of Supervisors. If voters had done a media search, Googled information about Sean Nelson, you could see these, fairly big red flags for this person to be elected. Um, Campaign finance violations and just really not a judicial demeanor. Lots of yelling and fighting with other people on the board. Hypocrisy about taking public pension when he's been attacking people for having public pensions, and even the local campaign finance law when he was a board of supervisors, opening up an account to have people donate to his judicial campaign while he was making decisions for the county of Orange. Lots and lots and lots of problems that were fairly easy to see, and yet he won overwhelming because he had the ballot designation of deputy district attorney and he had name recognition because he had served in these positions before. And in fact, when we look at the winners of that June 2022 election, you see that everyone for the 8 competitive seats where 2 people or 3 people were running, the district attorney won those seats. There's a huge bias. And again, not that these are terrible people, but the voters are not aware of whether or not they're good or bad. Eric Scarborough had some allegations of being involved in the snitch scandal. Brahim Batai had been fired by the district attorney. So there are some questions about whether or not the voters have enough information. Claudia Alvarez had been censured as a city councilwoman in Santa Ana. Lots of potential problems that we saw. The one that went to a runoff was again because the judge in that case died in February of 2022. And so there wasn't a district attorney that jumped in that race. Michelle Bell was a commissioner, which means she had been appointed for a judge light position on the Superior Court by her peers, the other Superior Court judges. Peggy Wong, who's an attorney for the city of Huntington Beach, a councilwoman for Yorba Linda, obviously had the second largest number of votes, and they then were on the ballot in November for a runoff. And that is part of the problem with electing judges is you have people who essentially want to serve the public as judge, and we're asking them to raise money. We're asking them to put out yard signs and campaign, and whether or not that is in the best interest to make them be politicians for what essentially we do not want to be a political job, it is another question to contemplate as we're thinking about how we choose our Superior Court judges for the county. The vast majority of Superior Court judges are appointed by the governor. A lot of those judges are not retiring at the time to have their seat appear on the ballot. And so lots of judges for our Superior Courts are appointed and then appear on the ballot as the incumbent in the next election. So we do have the question, are appointments better? The governor has a background sheet. You're applying. You have to have letters of recommendation. There's a lot that goes into applying to be a Superior Court judge and being appointed by the governor. There are interviews. There's more vetting, in my opinion. And I just don't think we have a bias towards voting because then the public has the power. However, if the public doesn't have the information and really no easy way to get it, most of the ways that you research a judge are to look at their website or to read their ballot statement. Well, nobody's going to tell you bad things about themselves in either of those places. So there is a question of whether or not California should change the way that we select our judges. Now, we are a one-party state with Democrats dominating the governor's office. So we would have to look at, do governors have a bias on, towards Democrats? And there's clearly a question about that. But that's something that you can definitely research and see how different governors have done with that, to whether or not that's a reason to stop. We do have, when we look at the research of who the governor has appointed, far more diversity away from simply choosing deputy district attorneys. You have more civil lawyers, you have more public defenders, you have more lawyers with lots of different experience applying for the governor's appointment rather than wanting to run for election and be a candidate, and then also being selected because the governor has a lot more information than the average voter. Merit selection, the one thing, if we ever switch to this, that I would want to put in the California Constitution, our California governor is not bound by appointing a qualified applicant. Now, most of our governors have always chosen not just a qualified applicant, but a very qualified applicant. They have the ability to be even more selective than what the Constitution sets out. But that would be the biggest thing if you ever were going to do away with competitive judicial elections and go to a merit selection system. I would definitely want to borrow from other states who have this put in, and a nonpartisan commission, whether it's the ABA or another nonpartisan commission in different states, that is rating and providing information about their performance as attorneys and then also as judges. So that tells you a little bit about that. The last thing that I'll leave you with is to remember that you can leave it blank if you don't feel like you know enough about judicial candidates. You can always leave that section of your ballot blank. And honestly, I would encourage you to do so because we so rarely have enough information about these candidates. And it's far better to skip that and allow people who are more knowledgeable and informed to make that selection. But if you are interested, definitely do your research, definitely look at their performance, definitely, look at media articles to see that, and look at their rating from the Bar Association, their fellow judges, look at who's endorsing them. That kind of information can help, but honestly, it is far easier to leave it blank, and not risk voting for somebody who has, a fairly um, shady past that you wouldn't want to support. So that's competitive elections.